Welcome back. Let's now look at some more detailing on the cloud compute part. So in that, virtualization is very important. So before getting into the details, we have seen that the common, as far as cloud computing is concerned, three different deployment models. One is the infrastructure as a service and platform as a service and software as a service. We saw a kind of a pictorial representation, and this is in a kind of a block diagram wise, as giving all the details. Like infrastructure as a service, we know servers, storage, networking. There is another component called virtualization. That is where we will see what is virtualization in this presentation, because that is very important as far as infrastructure as a service and platform as a service is concerned. Now, platform as a service, you have tools to develop the application, and data is what you provide. So that's where it says the provider manages it, all these things. The OS, virtualization, server, storage, networking. The tools part, of course, is provided as, it's part of the platform as service. Tools to develop the application. Tools to develop the application is part of the platform as service, and um, that is once you develop the application, then you have to manage it. That is what it says. So here in black, representing black, you have to manage the application. You are the owner of the data as well. The software as a service, yes, you manage, you are responsible for the authenticity of the data because you are inputting the data. So authenticity of the data is dependent on you, whereas the backup, whatever it is, the security, they have to ensure that the service provider ensures that the data, the applications are available 24/7. That's where the software as a service, even the application is developed by the vendor, so the application part um, is managed by the vendor, whereas the data, all the data which you are supposed to create, so the integrity of the data, the trueness of the data is you are responsible, because they don't enter any kind of a data in the system. So if you look at it, about 4 or 5 years back, this was quite distinct: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. But this gap is narrowing down: infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. But what is happening is that most of the service providers are now providing a free tier, meaning some of the components, particularly in the infrastructure side, the virtual machines, the low-end virtual machine with minimum configuration of maybe the virtual machines are provided free of. They also, some of them like Oracle, provide always free tier. Azure or Google may say 3 months or 4 months of free tier, or if you don't go beyond a capacity, it is always free tier. There is a complexity involved in it, but the point to note here is they have now introduced the concept of free tier based on the capacity of utilization. They have now introduced that. Last couple of years, now we are in 2022, and since 2019, they have introduced. Oracle first introduced it with a free tier, and everybody, Azure, Microsoft, Google is also following it up with their version of free tier. And free tier is most common, always free tier is most common in infrastructure as a service. The point again, we'll get back to the virtualization part. Again, virtualization is little technical, but yeah, you could understand it. Another point to understand is here that the gap is getting narrowed between the infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. They are combining it, whereas definitely software as a service is provided as a separate offering when compared to infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So you'll have a single platform where infrastructure as a service and platform as a service is combined and provided. So what is virtualization? So virtualization is creation of virtual server, infrastructure device, computing device, something like, and if you look at the example in a software, I mean in a laptop, you could have a single hard disk. It's quite common in the laptop. You partition it to 2 to 3 virtual hard disk. Maybe you say a C drive wherein you have all the OS related information, so you don't manipulate the C drive even by mistake. So that is always kept as a separate C drive in your laptop, is for the OS part, and the rest you can partition as DE, where you keep all your all your data, or whatever your Excel files or your Word document files are created on DE drive. Again, it's a virtual partition. You have a single hard disk, and that is being partitioned according to your requirement. So virtualization, to an extent, you can borrow it from there. So virtualization is the similar concept. So if you look at what is server utilization, virtualization, server virtualization transform one physical server into host of many virtual machine, and even that virtual machine can run a separate independent operating unit and application in the virtual, and even an IP address, static IP address, something like 192 or 257 dot, you have an independent IP address is provided, static IP address are provided to the virtual machine, and you can use the virtual machine. As I said, you can have your own operating system, you can have your own application. So that is the it's called the virtual machines. There are hardware partitions, and or it could be through emulation or full virtualization. So machine or server utilization. So hardware virtualization in cloud computing is a flexible uses of virtual machine rather than the physical machine. You can still have a single physical machine on which you can have multiple virtual machine. So this is a traditional model where you have the hardware, on that you have the operating system, on that you have the application. On the right hand side you have the virtual machine, I mean you have the machine, physical machine, on that you have the virtualization layer. On top of it you have different OS, operating system, on and the application. But if you look at it, it is all, if you narrow down, it will be residing on the same physical server. So that is what is virtualization is all about. So there is a concept called hypervisor, little bit technical, but just to understand, there is a component called hypervisor. A hypervisor is also known as virtual machine to monitor VM, is software that creates, runs virtual machine. Hypervisor allows one host computer to support multiple VMs by virtually sharing resources such as memory or processing. A point to note here is, when you look at the definition of the cloud computing, the elasticity is important. You change the shape of the hardware, the configuration of the hardware. Maybe you want higher capacity memory, the higher capacity memory, because the reason you might require a better capacity memory is that suppose there is a heavy huge load, then probably you might require a better processor. You can you can have combined processors, 2-3 processors, and you can also add more memory, particularly during month end. You can do a kind of a hardware pooling. That's all possible with the cloud computing, and that is where the rapid elasticity happens. You can increase the capacity of the machine as and when required, and then you can virtually bring it down. That's all not possible with when you go for your own hardware system. It is always difficult to do it, whereas in case of cloud computing involving hypervisor, it's all possible in the infrastructure as a service. So benefit: as a cloud-based virtual machine, maintenance is taken care by vendor. You don't need your own team, or you don't need to do it. Economical: add resources is required if required based on the performance in the sense as and when required, particularly month end, quarter close, or during the year end when there is going to be application is going to be used, and large chunk of data is going to get in, and large processing is going to happen in the month end, quarter close, or year end. You can always scale up your processors, memory. That's all not possible in the on-premise. When you own your own hardware, you just cannot plug in the process memories as and when required and then remove it. That's not possible in the physical server when you own it, whereas in a cloud-based system you could do it. So drop and recreate as required. Still, it's almost like having your own computer based on need basis. So that's where it is advantage to go for a virtual machine. And finally, if you look at this diagram, it is how we have evolved over the years, 1980s and 90s, 2000, 2010 onwards. So 1918 they developed 80s and 90s waterfall model, monolithic application. It's not component based, hardwired in the sense you had procedures and functions. It's not component based. You might not have used Dockers. You would have heard keep hearing Dockers. So that's where it becomes Kubernetes. That's where it comes as a microservice and a container. So monolithic, physical server and data center. So this is 1980s and 1990s on the top row. And then came 2000, agile based application development. When internet came is what from 2-tier, that is client server, we moved into the 3-tier, wherein the browser we had, so 3-tier, and that is where we had virtual servers. Virtualization came in, and then the hosted environment. But the virtual server is now more predominant, particularly with the cloud environment, and container is now catching up. Container is the container microservices concept is all about the Dockers and Kubernetes, and you have DevOps also. So this process happens as well. So this is in a nutshell. At high level overview, getting in deep, you could do it, but that requires lot of technical knowledge. Thank you. Stay tuned.